So this video is going to show how to create some digital paintings and then how to take those paintings and place them into some mock-ups. Now these are some pretty simple mock-ups to create. So I'm actually going to do those first. I'm going to set up the mock-up and then I'm going to digitally paint. I'm going to show you how to do some quick, simple digital painting techniques, what you might want to have open, best methods, and then how to apply those into our setups here. So let me start with this simple one first. They are going to get a little bit different. So this one's going to be simple. We're just going to change up, do a little distortion. This one we're going to do a little distortion and of course a little bit of masking to mask some of these out. And this one we're going to do a little bit of warping. So let's start with the simple one first. So what I'm going to do, I've already set this all up for you, so it's all ready to go. This is the file you're going to work on. You're going to have, these are some great images I found online, I believe at Pexels. Great simple ways to start with our blank areas to work with, because it's just going to make things easier for us to, when we want to blend in, it's going to work a lot better. So what I'll do is you're going to place your paintings here and then you're just going to mock them up here. So I will start with the first one here. All right, so that's all I really want to do is I want to get an area here that I want to set up. So I'm just going to place my image into, my digital painting image into, which I'll show you how to do. But what I want to do first, I need to set this up in order to make it very, very simple for me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a smart object method. What I want to do here is I'm going to just drag out a rectangle. And now the rectangle doesn't matter how I'm going to drag out the rectangle, but I just want to roughly get the idea of the shape of what I'm going to fit into, which is going to be this white area here. I'm not going to drag out something like this. I want to drag out something closer to the ratio of what that rectangle will actually look like, which is something like that. Can I make it bigger? For sure, but I don't need it to. I'm just going to dragly rough out a size of that I want to fit in that white area there. But before I do anything else, what I'm going to do, I'm going to convert this to a smart object. I'm going to right click and convert to smart object. I could also do that up here, right click and convert to smart object. So now I have a smart object here. The good thing about this is the way it's going to go, I'm going to distort this now, but it doesn't matter what the distortion looks like or anything like that, because once I double click into my smart object, I'll be able to change it up, do whatever I want here, or place in any image I want here, and it'll automatically move into this space that I'm about to create. So let me explain what I'm talking about. First off, playing with the blacks, probably not a great idea just because of the way I'm going to measure it out. So what I'll do, inside, let me do this one more time. I'm going to double click on that smart object. Inside here, what I'll do, I'm going to change up the color. I'll change up the color to some random color. Red is fine. The color does not matter at all. I'm going to go back, I'm going to save it, Command S, because we know if we save a smart object or the contents inside of a smart object will automatically change in the smart object. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to now align this to the white area, to cover this white area. The best way to do that is, number one, right away, I'll go to my opacity. I'll bring the opacity down to say like 50, 40%, doesn't matter, just so I can see. I'm going to zoom in, Command T or Edit, Free Transform. And one of the transformations I'm going to do right now is distort. But a way to distort without actually clicking on distort is just holding down Command and clicking on any corner and it'll distort it for you. So this is how I'm going to do it. So I can zoom in really close and do the best I can to zoom in to roughly where that will be to cover up the white area. Now that bit of shadow there, I'm definitely going to want. I'm going to hold down Command right about there. Bring it down, hold down Command. Right about there, and again, Command click, and right about there. Now the idea here is to cover all that way. So I just distorted this, and it looks good. I'm happy with that. I'm going to press Enter. I cover it roughly pretty good. I could always go back in and fine tune it, but generally I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. And now I can bring that up to a 100%, and I'm done. I'm done with that one. And I can leave that one alone. I can come back to that later. I just wanted to set it up. That's all I needed to do. Because really that's all that's going to happen now. If I double click on this, I go in here. I could put anything I want in here. Let me just show you what I mean. I'm going to just put some type in here. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this layer, put a new layer, or I'll just click on a type layer and type in the word hello. And I'm going to stretch it up. I'm going to do it properly. So it's in perspective, or it's properly scaled here. And I'm just going to press Enter. And now when I save this, Command S, it is going to be in the distortion of that smart object. So it's going to flow with how this kind of looks. But we're going to do this with the digital painting afterwards. But I just wanted to show you that. But we're also going to do a little bit of working with this a little bit later too. So I am going to shut that part off here, bring back the red, save it, and I can close it as well. And now my smart object is set. Now I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to roughly draw out a shape, but more to the ratio of what this billboard looks like, which happens to be more rectangular, longer, or wider, I should say, not as tall. So roughly about there is totally fine. And what I can do with that on this billboard here, there it is. I selected this billboard just to make sure I was on that artboard, and there it is. And you know what? Let me just change the color here before I convert it to a smart object. Now I'll convert it to a smart object. So make sure you convert all your initial rectangle shape layers to smart objects before you start editing them. This is how it works. So what I'm going to do, once again, bring it down to 50%. And I'm going to Command T or edit free transform. And once again, I'm not going to just click on distort. I'm just going to distort it myself manually by pressing Command on the corners and trying to find those corners really, really quickly. And then I could zoom in and, you know, do a little bit better job there. The better you do, the closer you get, the more detail you get, the better off it is, obviously. So there I am. Looks good. I'm holding down Command to distort my corners, and roughly there I am. Okay, that's good. But there is a bit of an issue on this one. Well, I have these in the way. And what I need to do with those is I need to mask those out. So whatever I place in here, those lights will show up, and the painting or whatever artwork I put will show up behind. So very simply, with my smart object selected, I'm just going to click on Quick Mask. And now I have a mask. And now with that mask, what I could do is mask out these areas very simply. So let me bring this up to, actually, I'm happy still at working at 50%. I'm going to make sure the mask is selected, not the pixel layer or the smart object. I'm going to make sure the mask part of that layer is selected. I can see with the black borders around it. And I'm going to go to my paint tool. I was playing with my paint tool earlier. I'm going to make sure that my default general brushes are on. I'll play around with my hardness and softness, and I'm just going to paint on black, which will hide the pixels of this red layer. So let me make it smaller by using my open and close bracket brushes. And I'm just going to start painting black, which will delete the pixels of my red layer here. Now, what I'm going to show you is a couple different methods here. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller and try to do the best I can. Oh, I just had a little bit of a glitch there. So I'm just going to paint black. And what I'm doing is, like I said, I'm hiding the pixels of my smart object, of my shape layer, that red layer. And yeah, I'm going a little off, and that's okay. That's kind of what I want to do, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to paint it back by switching my white now to foreground color. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to paint them back in. I'm just going to get a little more detailed because I don't want that white to show up, but I also don't want it to go over top of this particular object here. So I'm going to be very meticulous here, try my best, but I'm going to show you a method on the next one to potentially make it a little bit quicker. So I went over a little bit there, that's okay. Just kind of, and make sure your opacity is 100%, your flow could be 100% as well to make that brush work a little bit better. Now I'm going to do the same thing here, however, I'm going to do a little bit different. I'm still going to have my mask selected, but I'm going to paint white. I'm going to make sure I'm painting white, not black. I'm going to use my polygonal lasso tool. And instead of just brushing, I'm actually just going to quickly create that shape that I want to normally brush out. And it'll just get me there a little bit quicker than all those little paint steps. The better I do this, the more detailed I am here, the better. So I'm on the mask, I've made a selection, and I'm on white. My foreground color is white. I'm gonna press delete. Perfect. Command D or select, deselect, Command D. And now look, it looks really good. I could of course fine tune it if I want to. I want to paint back some of those pixels. So with white, I could bring some of those pixels back. If I went a little too far or it wasn't perfect, that's great. Let me continue on. Once again, I'm going to go on my mask, and I'm just going to kind of do a decent job with my polygonal lasso tool, which I find works a little bit better than the lasso tool. Is a little too freeform, and maybe my hand's a little shaky today, who knows. All right. And once again, with my mask selected and white as my foreground, I press delete, and that's what it does. I can go back and fine tune that once again if I want to. Let me do that really quickly. Brush tool. I'm going to paint on white again to bring that back. So I'm showing those pixels. And let me continue on. I'll go a little bit faster now. All right, so I've done my last one there, looking good. Once again, I can always tighten up that mask. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to bring this back up to 100%. And that one's ready to go. Well, something happened here where I didn't quite get that one and this one. So let's fine tune those ones again. Bring this down to 50%. But I also am going to play around with this option as well. And I'll show you how to do that with the polygonal tool as well. All right, there I go. I could always go back if I mess it up, and when I bring in my artwork, maybe my artwork works in a way where it's a light painting on top of the white background, it'll work okay. But if it's darker and I could see some of that white shining through, I could just easily go back into my mask and fix that. It's very, very easy to do. So I'll bring that back up to 100%. All right, good, looks pretty good. I could always clean those up, but generally looks pretty. I'm happy with that. Now the last one I'm going to do is this one's going to get me onto my magazine. I'm just going to command click because I never have my auto select on. I command click and now I'm on my artboard for magazine. And I'm going to do the same thing once again, but this time I'm going to have two pages. I'm going to do one rectangle and a separate rectangle. So I'm going to do the same thing roughly. I'm about there. I'm happy with that rough ratio of what that would look like. I'll change it to a color red. Doesn't matter what color. White obviously would be a little trickier to see. Black potentially could work, but I'll just use a random color here. And once again, I'm going to, what I've noticed as well, what's been happening, I have a stroke that's on by default, which I don't want. So I'm just going to click on that stroke in the property panel and shut it off, no stroke. I have it here, but I could always shut it off. It's not a big deal, but just to do that now, you may have noticed. So once again, I'm going to convert this to a smart object before I do any work. Now this one's a little bit different. So I can't just make a square. I'm going to have to warp it. I'm going to show you how I warp those. I'm going to have to warp both of these. One's a little bit more extreme than the other. So let me just start with this one. So what I'll do first is I'm going to distort it. Command T or free transform. And I'm just going to command click the corners and find those corners. I'll do it really quickly at first. Great. Now the great thing about these methods is you could do this to any picture at all, especially if you take your own pictures and you want to bring in an image onto them. You could do this. I just found these online. Some pictures I take myself, but for the most part, you could do this. It's really, really easy to do. Bring the opacity down to 50% to get a better look. So that's what's great about this method is you can apply it to absolutely anything you want. Now, definitely there are other there are plenty of templates you can find online to mock things up, but why not learn how to do it yourself? It's a great idea here. Okay, so I've gone as far as I can with potentially dragging it with distortion. Now I need to warp it. So I'm going to go to warp. So that was a right click, warp. Or I can go up to edit and transform and warp. And once I click on warp, I'm going to have a few other options there too, but I'm just going to say warp, but I want to show you some of the other things you could do here. So warp is on and it gives me a mesh. We're familiar with meshes, but here I can actually split my mesh to even more. And I almost have the default. So instead of just this layout, I could get a 3x3, a 4x4, or 5x5. So if I want even more areas on to make the mesh, so even more mesh will show up, which I can now manipulate the warp even more so. I'm just going to start with the default and let me show you what that gets me. So I'm going to play around, and what I can do, I can click and drag these options here. But what's important with the warp is that you do need to match up not only this border here, but these warps have to kind of flow with it as well, the inside warp there too, if you will. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to match it as best I can. And right now it's kind of not getting where I want it to go. It's just not, I need more of the mesh. So what I'll do, I'm going to try my best here first. I'll get as close as I can. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in more of the mesh. Just fine tuning this as best I can. There I go. So I need help there. I need help here. I could do a little bit out here. And I need help there. So now I'm going to add. Now I could either do this manually or just add in more. Let me show the manual method. I'm going to add in a vertical. I could also right click and just add in warp and split warp vertically, which I'm going to do right here. So as I hover over, it's showing me where I could add a vertical mesh, an extra line, which I want right about here. And there I go. I have added another line, and now I could potentially bring this down. It gives me another control arm to work with. Once again, I'm using kind of the vector idea of this, which is great. And that is helping me figure this out here. Now, the closer you are, the better, of course. We definitely want to try to get rid of that white as much as we can. I'll bring this up a little bit more. And you can really fine tune it. And that's kind of what I'm looking to do here. There we go. Not too bad. And once again, I could always, if I'm having really, really big trouble, I could always mask that out if I want to. So I'll try my best here, but I can always mask that out. And let me go down here as well. That other vertical line did show up. So let me bring this down here. Just fine tuning it. Once again, I could always mask it out if it gives me some trouble. Kind of going back and forth here a little bit. That's okay. I'm actually going to mask that. I'm going to show you that option. Now, I do have an issue here where, you know, it is kind of coming up like this, where I want to kind of smooth that out a little bit, which the best way I can do. I want it to flow with the actual page is kind of coming up and then down and in about. So I could kind of play around with those as well. Even this one here kind of moved a little bit on me. So I could kind of grab that line, if I can grab that line, and work with it, and which can still mess up my, more important, the contour of what I'm trying to make here. But either way, I am going to mask those out. Okay, so I'm pretty good with that, but I do need to play with it a little bit more. That's okay. The warp generally did a great job. And once again, I tried to make that mesh a little bit better, but that's all right. I'm actually kind of happy with the way that flows right now. And I'm okay with that. So what I could do, once again, I need to work with that. I'm going to add a mask to that and quickly just brush off or hide with my brush tool. Hide some of those pixels that I don't want my, I don't want it to be on. I don't want my pixels to be seen here. Actually, we'll use the polygonal because I think it's just a little bit quicker in this situation. I, of course, could do a better job, but I want to go a little bit quicker just to show you. So I'm just going to get rid of all of that. Remember, I'm on my mask. I'm going to paint white and delete, and then it gets rid of that. That I'm going to leave for now just to say, hey, it's okay. And that one I'll leave for now, and I'm not too concerned. Like I said, I'd go in and fine tune it if I really needed to. The next one I'm going to do, I'm going to go a little bit quicker this time. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab a rectangle. I'm going to bring this back up to 100%. Sorry. And I'm going to grab another rectangle and do roughly the same idea. Roughly about there. Great. And I'll change it to red. And I will get rid of the stroke. I will convert it to a smart object. And I will lower the opacity and get to work. Now here, once again, I'm going to add a warp. But this time, because I have, I'm going to need more. I'm going to add warp, but I'm going to add in, let's go with a 3x3. Yeah, that's pretty decent. So now I can get 3 squares per quadrant. And now I can kind of work with it a little bit better. Let's see how this goes. All right. Now this is, like I said, it's going to flow a little bit differently, but that's okay. I actually don't mind that. I could always go back and fine tune it, but this is fine for me. I'm going to press OK. I could mask out if I want to mask out. Oh, there's a little bit of an issue there. So what I could do, I Command T again, go back to warp, and I could actually, everything remains the same. So it's not like I'm resetting it. I'm actually can just go right back into warp and fix it up again a little bit. Perfect. I'm happy with that. I can mask it out, but I'm totally fine. I'm going to bring that into 100, and now I'm good to go. I see there's a little white line there, but once again, once I bring in my digital painting, I can always play around with that. So those are set up now. They're good to go. I can always go back in and fine tune them, but I'm happy with it, and that's more or less what I'm looking to do. Can I label these a little bit better? Sure. Let's go to wall art and let's actually call this, this is the poster. let's just say poster, or I can call it wall art, doesn't really matter. Oh. And then go to billboard, and this obviously is the billboard. Always a good idea to label your layers. This, of course, is the right page, and this is the left page. All right, and that's it. So now with those done, I'm going to now continue on to the painting part of it. Now, I'm just going to mess around with one idea, because I want to show you, I'm going to do one painting, but I'm going to show you different methods and different ways to play around with the painting. So here's the painting part of this tutorial. I'm going to set myself up with a few things. Number one, I'm going to open up my brush panel and my brush settings. So if you don't have that window, and brush settings. So brushes and brush setting. And I'm going to make sure I can see both at the same time. Just to show you this part of it. You don't really need this, but just to show you that these things do exist and this is how they work. All right. I'm also going to open up my color panel and my swatches panel. Like I said, I don't normally do this. So I'm just playing around with what potentially I would use traditional media, have my colors, have my paint, have my different brushes, and have swatches as my palette almost to save colors that I want. Now there's a lot going on here, which is fine, but I definitely still need my layers panel, I need my tools, and my brush settings, my brushes in general. So I'm just going to start on painting one. So I'm going to click on that, and I see it's there. I can click on it here, and I'm going to start on painting one. There's no layer in there yet. When I want to paint, there's many different ways to paint. Just as you know, when you're traditionally painting, you could have many, just paint directly on it. In this situation, because we have Photoshop, we could use many layers in a non-destructive way, and we could utilize those in many interesting ways to create beautiful textures in different depth and form. And it's really, really great to use that and paint in Photoshop. So I'm just going to do some quick methods. I'm going to show you all the methods I want to see used, but even some methods that are available to you in general if you just want to get into digital painting, which is fun. A fun way to experiment and create in Photoshop. So here I am going to make a new layer. The very first thing I'm going to do, brush tool. I have a few different brush tools I can mess with. Brush tool, pencil tool, color replacement tool, mixer brush tool. I'm only really going to play around with the brush tool and the mixer brusher tool just to show you what they do. Brush tool. Okay, basics of brush tool. We know right now I have if I drop down here, I could see the rotation of it. I could see the angle of it, the roundness. If I want to change up the roundness, I could change up the roundness, the size, the hardness or softness, and all the different brushes that Photoshop currently has in its library. Clearly, you could load a lot more brushes if you want to load more brushes. But in this situation, get more brushes, import brushes. I'm just going to focus on what we have. But even with the brushes we currently have, there's so much we could do with it. So I'm just going to click my main brush first. I'm going to have like I said, my hardness. I'm going to bring down so it's very soft. And my size of my brush, I could change by just clicking on my bracket. Open or close bracket. Sorry. Open, let me undo that. Open or close bracket. Trying to undo this, give me a hard time. There we go. And I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger by using the close bracket, or open bracket makes it smaller. So I have a quick access to that too, which is great. Now up here with all my brushes, or all the brush, doesn't matter what brush you use, you have control over the blending mode, which we'll talk about in a bit. You have control over the opacity. So right now my opacity is 100, that's what I get. If my opacity was down to 50%, that's what I get. My opacity is down to 10%, that's what I get. Now remember, it's all on its own layer right now. My opacity is going to be up to 100%. And now what I can do with my flow currently was at 100% as well. My flow will now be down to 50%, just to show you what that does. And my flow will be down to 10%, and that's what that does. With different brushes, you'll see different effects. So I'm going to get rid of all of those as well. So right now I'm just going to keep everything at 100. Smoothing, once again, I can play around with that where I bring it up all the way. And what it does is when you click on that, it smooths it out, which is beautiful. But when you click, it doesn't necessarily follow it. If I bring that down to 10%, it stays true to it. So the less smoothing, the closer your brush tip will actually be to the painting. The more smoothing, you're going to paint, and your paint's not going to follow that brush necessarily. It's going to kind of come in just a little bit later. But once again, play around with it. There's a lot of different techniques you can play around with here that you might want to use, whatever you prefer. So right now, I'm just going to leave it at this. Now I'm going to go to my brush settings. So once again, I had all my brushes here, which is the same as your brushes here. I have all these different brushes you can get. You could download so many brushes or just look at all the different brushes you can get here. General brushes, dry media brushes. So if you get a little bit more texture, I'll make that a little bit bigger. That's what I can get. Wet media brushes. So potentially like watercolor kind of effects. Make it a little bit bigger. What do I have here? That is a blender, sorry. The blender is more for the mixer brush. So sorry, the blender brushes are more for mixing. This one here, this is just a normal paintbrush, and that's what I can get there too. Either way, playing around, special effects brushes, you can play around with whatever you want. I just wanted to show you those. And now with whatever brush I have, and whichever ones you clicked on will remain in your kind of most recent. I'm just gonna go with my normal one here. And now I have my brush settings. I'm just going to separate that so you can see my brush settings. So once again, I can still see all my different brushes, which is great. I can click on brushes and bring my brushes back. So really, that's all you need is the brush setting, and it'll open this up if you want. I can now choose a tip. Great, whichever tip I want. And now down here is going to show me what that brush will do. Because right now, if I click on my shape dynamics, I can control the jitter, how it paints, how it comes off. I can control a lot with that. Plenty of ideas here. Some will move, some won't. That's great. I could change up my scattering. How much of it scatters, where it scatters, how much. There's a lot you could do with settings. I'm not going to go into it too much. You could choose different textures you want to apply to a brush. You could have two brushes at the same time. How the colors work. There's so many things you can do. Smoothing. If the color is going to build up over time, we could do that too. That's all I want to play around with. I'm just going to go back to my shape dynamics. I just want to show you one last one, which is the spacing, and you could space out how the brush actually does that too. And the softness, hardness. Let me just play around with this just to show you. Cool. That's all. That's all I want to show you, because now we're just going to mess around with painting in general. So my brushes are done. I have my one layer still available to paint. Now here with the color, you have a lot of options. A hue cube you can go to, which we're familiar with, the HSB. Brightness cube, you could do just the brightness effect. Color wheel, this is one I like to work with. A grayscale slider, RGB sliders. So there's many different ways to choose colors. I'm going to stick to the color wheel. The color wheel, obviously the hues around the outside, which is right there. The saturation is going to be on, let me choose a color here. The saturation is going to be on the inside as well with the brightness or luminance, all right? So just picking a color, let's pretend I really like this color here. Whatever, it looks good, it's my foreground color, that's what I'm going to paint with. So whatever your foreground color is what you're going to paint with. And let's pretend I really like that color. I'm going to make it a part of my palette, which ideally would be your swatch. You add it, say, yeah, I'm going to call it gold, and there it is. And I can always go back and eyedrop it and get ready to use that again. That's all the swatches is there for, to kind of create a palette for yourself where you could just continue using something. Or you can choose some of the palettes that are already there, loaded by Photoshop, and tied up to you. I'm just going to paint. I'm going to get a little silly here, just kind of have some fun with it and paint around. I'm going to show you a few different options. So this is just your normal technique of painting. See what happens. I have a soft brush. Cool. I'm going to choose another color here that I had made up from before. I could choose it over here. Maybe I'll change up the lightness of it. All right, I'll paint there. Cool. Great. Now I want to show you the other brush here, which is the mixer brush tool. So what it does, and once again, it has its own options here, how wet it is, how much of the paint will load onto it. There's a lot of options here. Just want you to play around. Let's make it pretty wet and see what happens. I'll bring it all the way to 100 and let's just play and see what it does. More what I'm doing is I'm going between two colors and just painting. That's all. And it mixes the colors together. That's it. It takes a little bit of this, brings it over here. If I go green to this yellow, that's what I get. If I go yellow to the green, that's what I get. So it's a mixer brush. It just mixes the current colors you already have. And look, it's just on one layer, just to show you that. I'm going to undo that because even this is kind of interesting. All right, just going to play around. Great. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to pick a different brush. Let's try one of those dry media brushes and make it a little bit bigger. Space it out a little bit. Make it a little bit even more bigger here. Choose a different color. I'll go here. I will add it, so I can always go back to it. So purple for now. All right, and I'm just going to paint. Now I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'm going to go to, let's say 50%. My flow, same, I'll keep it low. And let's see what happens here. Okay. And now because it builds, meaning I could go on top of it and get it darker and darker and darker, just like a normal watercolor. You go back over, it dries, you paint a little bit more, it gets darker and darker and darker. All right. Now here's what I want to show you with this part. Okay. I have this odd paintbrush technique I just threw in there. Just because it's on top and laying on it, there's means I could do so much with this on its own. All right. And this is all I'm going to do. I have options to change up the opacity of it because it's on its own layer, which I strongly suggest use multiple layers to paint. So I could change up the opacity and how it interconnects with the layers below it, with the pixels below it. Cool. I can change up the fill, which in some situations it is the same. I'm going to show with some blending modes it does change. Some blending modes will change it, which I'm going to go to. Blending modes, I can hover through and just kind of hover over each one to see what it does. And some of them are affected by the opacity. So that's pretty interesting. Multiply. There are some ones you're going to use more often than others, but I just want to show you that I want to see some blending modes used on this as well. And just the interaction you get between these, interesting layers. Like that looks absolutely gorgeous. So we could play around and kind of get an idea. And this gives you so much more play with how you can work with blending modes. So let's say I'm happy with vivid light. I like what it did, but once again, maybe I want to play around with the opacity and see kind of what that does for me. It's something really interesting is happening here. All right, maybe I'm happy with that. Once again, maybe I could duplicate this layer. Command J or right click and you could duplicate any layer. And now maybe I'll do something interesting with it. Command T and I'll flip it around. I'll do something different. Once again, you could do that. And now I can play around with another blending mode, or it does something else. Who knows? I'll just go to this divides those colors up. Cool, whatever. Now, the other thing I can do, I can double click on it. And now I can play around with layer styles. So I played around with opacity. I played around with some fill. I played around with some blending modes. I played around with free transforming some of those individual layers. Now I can actually play around with, let's change the color up. So I didn't want that purple anymore. Maybe I want a different color. So layer styles, I go to color overlay, and now I could change up the color to anything I want. So there's another way to play around with any painting, which is great. I could play around with a few different things, outer glows and strokes, which I don't think you really put a stroke on that. The last thing I want to show you is playing around with a blend if. Sorry, not the last one. There's one more. There's adjustment layers too. I'm going to just do a blend if here. So I'm going to duplicate this one more time. I'm going to bring it up here. And I'm going to make it a different color. Let's make it a darker color. There we go. All right. So now I have this option with my layer style still active. In my blending options, I want to look at the blend if and see what it does. So right now I have many layers below it and I have the current layer. So I'll work on the current layer. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to work with the gray line here, not the red, green, or blue channels, just the gray. And I'm just going to see what removing white does, which there doesn't seem to be too much white in there, obviously. Let's remove black, what black does. Doesn't seem to be too much black, but we could split those up and see what kind of blend we get. Not much happening there with that particular layer. I think the reason why is because that color overlay, that's why. The color overlay kind of took over. Either way, I shut the color overlay off, and now I can play around the blend and how it blends in with the background. I have a little more control over it. By splitting these, holding down Option and splitting them, I get a better grade, a better smoothness, and let's try this way as well. See kind of how it interacts with those colors. Or I can play around with the underlying layer. I just want you to play around with this. The underlying layer and the underlying pixels, how they interact. So how the darkness of those pixels on the underlying layer interact with it well, which gives you a different effect as well. And just like that. So the blend if is also a great idea where you could take the full stop and move it. Or you can split it, hold on Option, and you get a better grade. It just kind of smooths out that grading a little bit better. So I definitely want you to play around with that as well. And when you do have something changed on there, you play with it a little bit. I'll press OK. What happens, this icon shows up showing you that a blend was added to that. A blend if was added. an advanced blending technique. So just want you to play around with that. And the last one I want you to look at are adjustment layers. Just to add something, whatever you want, even if you want to add a full solid color, it's on its own layer, great. Do whatever you want, whatever color you want, okay, and play with the blending mode if you want. So I definitely want to see blending modes used. I want to see adjustment layers used. I want to see layer styles used. I want to see blending options used, or blend if. That's kind of where I want to see this go here. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you there. Now let's pretend I'm very happy with this. I'm done with my digital painting. That's all I wanted to do. I'm going to make 3 other ones very differently. Hopefully one's an abstract one. One you could have a little bit more form or realism if you actually want to paint something using multiple layers, using one layer, using any of these techniques. It's entirely up to you. And then a third one, just play around with the painting. It's just a fun experiment of where you can go with some of these options. So now that I have this, I am going to click on it, Command A, and select all. Select and all, Command A, and I'm going to edit, copy, merged. So it's going to merge everything visibly it sees. So it's not just going to take this layer, that layer. It doesn't matter which layer I'm on. It's going to just select it all. I've copy merged it, and I'm going to bring this particular painting into this artboard. But remember, if I just paste it in here onto my wall art, let me undo that, go to my wall art, click on that layer, make sure I'm on that layer and paste it. Where did you go? There you are. And move it over there. Now it's on my wall art. Now that's not really what I want to do. The whole point of setting up that red area, that smart object, was to quickly paste it in instead of me having to take this and now I got to distort it and work with it to make it fit inside of this object. That's not what I want to do. I've already set it up in a very simpler way. So instead of doing that, what I'll do, Command A, copy merged. I'm going to go up, I'm going to deselect, Command D, make sure you deselect it. I'm going to click on that smart object. I'm going to open it up, double click on that smart object, and here I am inside the smart object. What I'm going to do is, well, I'm going to close all these panels. I really don't need them anymore. And now I'm in the smart object of that red. I'm going to Command V, paste it. Command T, free transform, and make it smaller. Anything I place into this object, into this smart object, will automatically distort, warp, whatever perspective I put on it, automatically in my setup area. So I'm just going to press enter. I could shut this off if I want, it does not matter. I'm going to save it, Command S, and Command W, I can close it, and look, automatically it gets added in that perfect distortion, the perfect way. That's why I set it up, and that's why it's easy to do, because now I can put anything, a double click in here, I can place anything in here very quickly, and it will automatically distort the proper way that I wanted it to. Now, we're not done yet though. What I can do here is, it's kind of flat looking. It doesn't really look like it belongs right now, just kind of this flat area. I can play around with blending options, blend if options, or a blending mode to make it work. Now, the one blending mode that seems to work best right away is multiply. But then again, if I look at multiply, I'm like, maybe I want to add an adjustment layer to make it a little bit brighter. I can add an adjustment layer. I'll add brightness and contrast, and I can make a clipping mask. So I make sure it only affects this layer. This layer will only show through these pixels. So if I make a clipping mask, the adjustment layer is above what I want it to show through. So I'm going to hold down Option. And now when I hover over and I hold down Option, this cursor shows up. I click, and now these pixels, or this adjustment, only comes through these pixels. So it's connected to this layer. So now with my brightness, I can move everything. I can change it up my contrast, play around. Many different ways to play around with this. And remember, it's not affecting the whole picture. If I get rid of the clipping mask, now it's making the brightness contrast on this below picture as well. Remember, the adjustment layer affects everything below it, unless I make a clipping mask, and now it's only showing through these pixels here, not these pixels. So once again, I can play around, click back on it, and it is a mask, so it has a white mask here, so I could paint and only show that I want some of it to be shown. Maybe I really like what's happening there, and I want to mask out the rest of it, so I could do that. And what I'll do really quickly, I'll right click and get back to this brush here. I'll make sure I'm on this brush. I'll right click, and I will get to my brush there. Great, I'm still on my main brush tool. I see what's happening there. I click on my mixers, and I don't want a mixer brush. I want just a normal brush. And those settings, opacity, well, let's go with 50%, it's fine. My flow, let's make it 100%. And once again, I can just mask out, you know, parts of it I want, don't want, whatever, fine tune it, and I get some kind of interesting there stuff too, which I'm not really looking for you to do. I'm just showing you some extra things you can do. Mainly multiply works well. I'm happy with that. I'm going to shut this off, and that's kind of what I get. Anyways, so multiply was good. So now let's kind of add this digital painting. Once again, Command A, edit, copy merged. I'm going to go up to this. Now, realistically, what's going to happen, you're going to make another painting here, and then this painting is going to go on this billboard. You're going to make another painting here, and this painting is going to go on your magazine. It could go on left and right. I'll show you either way. But I'm just going to take the one painting, and I'm going to bring it over here. I go here. I'm going to double-click on my billboard. Smart object. I'm going to paste. I'm going to shut this one off. I'm just going to size it up. Now, realistically, yes, of course, you can just size it up this way, or you can rotate it to make it fit. It doesn't matter to me. I really don't mind what you do in this situation. I just want you to play around. Let's try it this way, see what happens. Maybe I'll get more of that interesting texture there. I press enter. I save it, file save, or Command S, Command W, or close, and whatever happens now just gets added. Once again, it just kind of looks like a flat image. So what I could do, I can make an adjustment layer. Or a blending mode, sorry, my apologies, and start playing with that blending. And darken, multiply is the most common one, but I can still kind of go through and see if any of the other ones help out, which they don't really. So I'll get to multiply. But once again, even with that, what I could do, I could double click, I can go to my blending options, and I can still play around with my blend if. So the below pixels, if you remember, were more white than black. I could hold down Option to split this and see if I could find another way to kind of bring those together. And see that now I'm actually getting those pixels to show through a little bit more on the underlying layer, showing the white a little bit more, nice little gradient. Let's see what happens if I do this with the black. Not much, there's not much black there. Now the current layer, let's see what it does with its white. Yeah, I can kind of really wash it out. And with the darker pixels, the black pixels, not many, more at the top. Or at least there. But now let's even try playing with the red channel. I'm going to kind of remove some more of the reds. I could do that. Or the opposite of reds, which I'm not getting much of there. Or a little bit. And so on. Once again, you can play around with all the different channels, really play around, have some fun with it. Actually, that one kind of looks pretty good too, actually. But once again, I'll press OK. I'm happy with it, looks good. Just showing you some more options that we could play with blend if, or some more blending options. It's up to you how you want to play around. I'm going to do this one last time on here, and then we're done, and then I'll export it, and that's all you have to do. So once again, I click here, Command A, edit, copy merge. A good idea is to Command D and deselect, just to make sure that you can have access to everything you need access to. I'm going to click on the right page. I will double click on the smart object. I'm going to zoom out. Command V. Oh, see, I did the wrong thing there. Go back here. Command A. Edit. Copy merged. Go back here, which is already open. I didn't close it. Command V. There it is. Command T. Shrink it down. There I go. Command S. Save it. I'll go back here, and there it is. Now, once again, with that being shown here, I can go up to multiply and see how it interacts with it. Maybe there's a better option for this, maybe the way I want it to show through. Maybe I want that kind of nice highlight there to show through. Once again, I go to multiply, and I could always, once again, double click on it, go to my layer style, go to my blend if, and see how I can control the underlying colors, especially that white, and really blend it and make it sure like it's a very shiny paper or whatever the case is. And even in those shadows, which may or may not show up properly. All right, just playing around. Great. Okay, let's do the other one. I'll click on this one, double click, Command V. I'll bring it back as well. This time what I'll do is I'll make it just so it's a little bit different. So I won't Command T, shrink it down. I'll just focus on one area here. I will save it. I will close it. I'll even close this one too. And there I go. And once again, I can click on that. I can multiply. And I can double click, blend if. and see what I can bring back. What's harder? There we go. A little bit much, but just playing around. All right, and that's kind of it. So once again, we looked at setting up our mockups so we could quickly use smart objects to place in our digital painting. We quickly looked at digital painting using brushes, different brushes, brush settings, changing the brush settings, using color and swatch panel to create whatever creations you want for digital painting. Then we also looked at all the different methods of how we can now interact our layers together, which if we look at our one painting, I use multiple layers. I can use layer styles to change colors. I could use layer styles and blending options to do a blend if. I can use blending modes. I can use adjustment layers, many different types of adjustment layers to use. Of course, hue saturation. Let's bring up the saturation on all this for whatever reason. Just showing you, just playing around, change up the colors, change up the hues, like some cool stuff is happening there. I can do anything I want to play around. I definitely want you to play around with all these and see what kind of interesting creations you can come up with. Lastly, when I'm done, let's pretend I've done something on each of these artboards. I'm just going to do something really quickly. I'm going to paint on whatever I want. Lovely painting. And here's another lovely painting on this layer, on this artboard. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to make a new layer. Make sure it's on the painting 3 layer. There I go. And just having some fun really quickly. There you go. There's my beautiful paintings. Now what I'm going to do, very simply, very easily, I select all my artboards. This is all you need to do to export. Click on all my artboards. I right click and quick export as PNG. And that's it. Save my desktop. Now I should save them in an organized folder. But for now, actually let's do that new folder. This is, let's just say paintings, painting mockup, but I should name this properly. And I'm just going to create, and I'm just going to put, say, open, and now they're all going to be saved inside of that folder. All right, I open it up, and this is what I'm getting. I get all 6 of them, and you're just going to submit these with the PSD, and you're done. That's all. I hope that helps.